dearth of information that investors were making from DC. They were just doing things, and they said, well, what should we name it? Well, they named it Marwood because Joseph Kennedy, when he wrote lots of the financial services laws, he would bring to this Marwood estate people from DC and people from Wall Street together to talk about those issues and to create policy together. So that private-public partnership persists today, and yes, you make policy here, but it affects real people, real businesses, real healthcare.
And they have an influence on the way policy is structured. I mean, as we saw from, the stakeholder panel, it goes both directions.
Right. Anyone else have a question? Got about 10 minutes left.
We are the only thing standing between you and the passive line.
One more question.
Really, it's not you, it's me.
It's David.
Look at the program, I've got 30 minutes.
Oh, boy.
All right, one more question, then I'll sum up the panel.
So I guess my question is, you've all been out of the fellowship for a couple of years, and I guess what has been most surprising that's happened in policy since you left the fellowship, and also, what was something like a significant impact that the fellowship had since you left on you personally?
I mean, I left DC in April 2009. Stimulus bill had just passed, and healthcare reform was just getting going. So, we started getting involved in a lot of the Baucus meetings and didn't know if they were going to happen, if the bill was going to happen. But obviously, that was a long road that it ultimately got done, and that was interesting to see from the outside perspective. So that was a bit surprising. What was the second part of the question?
My second, it was completely unrelated question, is what is like a significant thing that your fellowship, since leaving it, is a significant impact it's having?
I mean, it's related. I just continue to be thoroughly impressed with where everybody ends up in the fellowship. It's incredible when you look at, you had Megan and Jay here earlier, and you had all these people in Office of Healthcare Reform, and it's just all over the place. It's really incredible, and I always say, from the day I got interviewed, I'm like, I don't know what I was doing here. I didn't think I belonged. I still don't think I belong. But I'm proud to be part of it, so that's great.
I would say one of the most surprising things, but in retrospect probably is not that surprising, is obviously I'm biased toward the Affordable Care Act, and so the number of repeal attempts that have continually happened over the past years over and over again, even with no hope of getting signed into law. So I think that kind of informs not only the polarization that we've seen on the Hill in the last 5-10, you could probably speak to this much better than I can, but also I think the importance of educating the public about what is going on inside the Beltway. I think so much of the repeal attempts have been fueled by people, in my personal opinion, because people don't know what the law is. That the law was, we didn't do a good job, or we could have done a better job of educating people what the law was. It's a complex law, and I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So I think it speaks to the, and this kind of goes along with kind of something that I've learned and is in terms of, we're so inside the Beltway and it's such a bubble, but really what you do really matters and really does touch people, and people in the very smallest communities will have a say, and you have to be thinking about them too. So I think that has been kind of an interesting piece of the puzzle, and coming from the administration side, that's stuff that we really think about and really kind of take to heart. I think when you get into these big kind of 30,000 foot positions, it can be hard to think about and remember the little guy who you're working for, but I think that's something that I think we all probably have in the back of our mind. I forget the other question. That's probably good. Yeah, it was just a summary statement.
I was surprised that SGR repeal got passed, and this small business change got made yesterday too. Because from 2010 on, it was, I just didn't see a lot of bipartisan deal making happen. You just kept hearing that the staffs don't even know they don't know each other, they don't know how to talk to each other, how can anything really get done, and then just one huge change, the SGR repeal got made, and then this this deal yesterday was significant because it actually affected one of the health insurance reforms that was brought about by the ACA, which had been off limits. But, you know, seemingly without much resistance, in fact, a lot of support, they changed it. So those two things, those both surprised me a lot. And achievements since, well, how has it helped since leaving? I think I mentioned in my last comment, but just that it has made a lot of difference in my ability to do a job. I didn't think I would use my policy experience as much as I do in working in product marketing for a Silicon Valley startup. I mean, now for a big firm through acquisition, but it's in healthcare, even if you're working in the private sector, federal regulations matter. You gotta understand how it works.
I left the Hill in 2007, summer of 2007, right after the House had passed the first attempt at CHIP reauthorization. What surprised me is how long it took to actually get that done, given that it was generally a bipartisan issue, and how that it is now a very different political conversation around CHIP, kids, and health than had historically been the case. And I think there's a lot to wonder about what's the future look like for CHIP. You guys should all talk to us about all of that. I think the other thing that surprises me is just the horrible failure of the policy arena to do anything thoughtful on long-term care. It's just, is it too hard? I don't know. But it's extremely disappointing.
And timely.
Galvanizing crisis, yeah.
Yes, the galvanizing crisis is coming.
It's coming,
So,
yeah. Scheduled.
impact of the fellowship, as I mentioned before, it is directly responsible for my current boss, and I probably wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing today but for that. And arguably also responsible for me meeting my wife. So pretty important. Pretty important fellowship.
And us.
You guys.
Okay, so I think the most surprising thing when I was on the Hill is how little time you have, and the few number of resources you have to actually make really important decisions that have ripple effects on lots of people. What's been really surprising to me also, kind of being outside of that and working for a foundation that is generating evidence and information and trying to get into the hands of people that are using it, is that there just aren't a lot of places where you can go as a Hill staffer or as an administration staffer to get information that doesn't come with some sort of bias or kind of financial bet. It's just really tricky. There's so many interests at play, and so I think that was a big lesson, and I didn't realize how unique it was going to be at some place like the fund where we didn't have a financial dog in the fight, and we didn't take kind of specific positions on pieces of legislation, but our only agenda was to kind of advance a higher performing health system. I didn't really realize how protected and awesome that would be, but it has been pretty cool. I think also I definitely did not see the Medicaid twist coming from the Supreme Court ruling, first one. No matter how much I was following the SCOTUS blog and, super obsessed with it, did not happen. And to Chad's point, I work with states too, and watching that unfold or not unfold, state to state, and you saw, was it Celinda's numbers or Bill's numbers that showed 65% of the population in Florida, and they were making that case that you've got wide support for Medicaid expansion, and you've got huge support in places like Florida, and yet you can't get across the finish line. And so I think that was a major roadblock. Surprise bump that we didn't see coming.
So I feel like the question's morphed somewhat, but I'll answer the question as I want to answer it. The biggest surprise for me that's happened